family members are allowed to join, so I'm taking my only family, my little sister, on this retreat.
My husband announces with a sly grin. I'm utterly shocked by his words, unable to respond, frozen in place. Earlier today, a notice about a company retreat arrived at our house. Since it said family members were welcome, I had been looking forward to spending rare quality time together with my husband and our son. As soon as my husband came home from work, my son and I eagerly told him the good news. However, his response was completely unexpected. He said he would leave us behind and take his sister on the trip instead. Recently, his sister has been spending all her time at our house. Hearing my husband's words, she smirks in an irritatingly smug way. Then, looking back and forth between my son and me, she sarcastically says, "Take care of the house while we're gone, all right?" My son, deeply hurt by their words, bursts into tears, his face streaming with large drops. I wrapped my arm around my son's trembling shoulders, feeling a crushing mix of anger and sadness. I could handle being hurt myself, but seeing my son hurt was unforgivable. And yet, my husband and his sister showed no reaction to my son's tears. They were giddy with excitement.
It's been ages since I've gone on a trip.
I need to buy some new clothes for it.
At that moment, something inside me shattered. My husband had long since lost sight of what it meant to have a family. To him, my son and I weren't family anymore. Only his sister held that place. Realizing this, I thought to myself, what a fool I've been. There was no longer any reason for me to keep living with him. With a deep sigh, I calmly said to my husband, "Fine. But first, could you sign the divorce papers? My name is Chloe, and I'm 32 years old. I live with my husband, Steve, and our 4-year-old son, Owen. Steve and I first met at a small house party hosted by our mutual friend. At the time, I was a newcomer at my company, exhausted from the unfamiliar demands of my job. When my friend invited me, I decided to go as a way to refresh my mind. Steve was introduced to me at the party. Even though he was my age, he had a calm demeanor that made him feel like a dependable older brother. He was gentle and a great listener. Whenever I spoke, he responded attentively, nodding and maintaining eye contact with a warm smile. Steve's kind eyes and sincere attitude made me feel deep down, I want to talk to him more. Summoning my courage, I decided to ask for his contact information. "Well, if it's okay with you, could we exchange numbers? Only if you don't mind." Having little experience with romance, even asking for his number was a huge leap for me. My face was probably bright red. But instead of making fun of me, Steve smiled warmly and said, "I'd be happy to. Absolutely." After that, we started texting often and spending our weekends visiting art museums and checking out new cafes. Steve was the kind of person I could deeply discuss art with whenever we visited museums, and I found such moments of talking about the pieces together incredibly enjoyable. Our relationship progressed slowly, and before I knew it, we were meeting almost every week. One day, during a quiet evening in the park, Steve suddenly spoke with a serious expression.
"Chloe, being with you truly brings me peace. I love your kindness and sincerity, and when I'm with you, I can just be myself. I'd love to keep spending time together like this forever. Will you be my girlfriend?"
Steve's heartfelt words made my heart race, and tears welled up in my eyes. I felt like it was fate to have someone I could connect with so effortlessly. That's how we started dating, and a few years later, Steve proposed to me. He reserved a table at a small lakeside restaurant and, with his cheeks slightly flushed, handed me a gift.
Go ahead, open it.
I nodded slightly and carefully opened the box. Inside was a simple yet brilliantly shining ring. Wow. I couldn't help but let out a gasp of admiration. Steve smiled gently at me and quietly said,
Will you marry me? I want to walk through life together with you, Chloe.
Overwhelmed with emotion, I was at a loss for words and could only nod. But Steve, looking delighted, held my hand tightly and gently slipped the ring onto my finger. That evening, even after leaving the restaurant, we stood under the starry sky, sharing our dreams for the future, losing track of time as we basked in happiness. And so, we began our peaceful newlywed life. At Steve's request, I decided to leave my job after our wedding. We spent our days finding joy in the little things, celebrating anniversaries by revisiting the art museums that held special memories for us, cherishing a warm and tranquil life together. Steve was often deeply immersed in his work, but to me, it was a reflection of his sincerity and a quality I deeply admired. However, a few years into our marriage, Steve's personality began to change. As Steve's work responsibilities increased, he gradually spent less and less time at home, and before I knew it, even when he was home, our conversations had become scarce. When I tried to talk to him, he would respond with a dismissive attitude. Though I felt lonely, I remembered the day he first confessed his feelings to me, cherishing the hope I had back then. I want to be with this man. And I kept hoping. It's probably just because work is tough right now. He'll go back to being the kind and gentle Steve I used to know someday. But even after our son Owen was born, Steve's attitude never changed. He left almost all the housework and childcare to me. I sat alone on a park bench, sighing as I watched Owen playing on the slide. Owen, who had just turned 4, was innocent and full of energy as always. After the slide, he ran toward the swings. However, halfway there, he turned around and came back to me. With a curious look, he asked,
Mommy, why doesn't my dad play with me?
Those words struck me deep in my heart. On Sundays, the park was full of families with fathers playing with their kids, so Owen seemed to wonder why his dad wasn't there with him. I gently patted Owen's head and answered as cheerfully as I could. Daddy is busy working, you know. Since he's working so hard, let's do our best too, okay, Owen? Although I said that, a vague sense of anxiety and loneliness continued to grow inside me. That night, I brought up the topic with Steve. Steve, I need to talk to you. Lately, Owen's been feeling lonely. Even when you're at home, you spend most of your time shut away in your room, don't you? I want us to spend more time together as a family. Steve stayed silent for a moment before slowly raising his head. However, his expression looked weary and exasperated.
It's not possible right now. Once work settles down, I'll make time for sure.
Hearing his response left me with a faint sense of despair. Every time I had expressed my concerns, asking him to spend more time with the family, Steve's answer had always been, not now, but someday. I had no idea when that someday would ever come. The thought of divorce crossed my mind, yet I couldn't let go of the hope that Steve might return to the kind and caring person he once was. It was around that time that something happened to add to my worries. It was when the topic of Steve's promotion began to surface. Steve's younger sister, Emily, my sister-in-law, started visiting our house frequently. Since Steve's parents have already passed away, Emily is the only family he has left. Perhaps because of this, Steve treats Emily with extra care. I can understand that, but Steve's affection for Emily seems to go overboard. It seems Emily recently got fired from her job and hasn't had any luck with her job hunt. Despite this, Steve took it upon himself to give Emily a spare key to our house and told her, "You can come over anytime you want." With the spare key Steve gave her without consulting me, Emily began acting as if our home was her own.
Oh, there's ice cream. Wow, strawberry ice cream is my favorite. I'll just help myself.
Emily opened the fridge without asking and happily took out the ice cream. Steve didn't reprimand her at all and instead smiled, saying, "Go ahead, eat whatever you like." Emily made herself at home, claiming the couch in front of the TV, monopolizing the remote, and lounging as if it were her personal retreat while eating ice cream. On top of that, Emily was inconsiderate toward Owen as well. She never said anything mean to Owen in front of Steve, but when Steve wasn't around, Emily's attitude was terrible. Even when Owen innocently asked, "Emily, will you play with me?" she would coldly brush him off and sometimes even shout at him in frustration.
Why do I have to play with you? And stop wandering around in front of me.
Owen, still so young, grew increasingly confused by Emily's coldness and would often end up in tears, which broke my heart. Of course, I confronted Emily about it every time, but she never listened to a word I said. I brought up Emily's behavior with Steve several times. While I understood Emily was going through a tough time, I expressed how her actions were negatively affecting both Owen and me, and I asked Steve to be more mindful of the situation. However, Steve's response was always the same.
Look, Emily is having a hard time. She's in an unstable place after losing her job, and as her family, it's only natural that we support her.
Hearing that, I couldn't push back any further, but deep down, I couldn't agree. I understood the need to support family, but Emily's selfish behavior seemed to be crossing the line. Before long, Steve started prioritizing Emily's demands even more, buying her whatever she wanted without hesitation. New clothes, expensive makeup, and even items related to her hobbies, Steve handed them over to her without a second thought. Even on his days off, Steve seemed to spend all his time on Emily, making it feel like he was increasingly ignoring me and Owen. Emily's presence felt like it was gradually encroaching on the space that Owen and I once had. Before long, I found myself crying at random moments. The reality of how far my marriage had strayed from what I had imagined weighed heavily on me, and I couldn't help but feel, this isn't how it was supposed to be. However, not long after, a piece of good news arrived at our home and that brought a spark of joy to both Owen and me. It was an announcement about a company retreat organized by Steve's workplace. For the past few years, the retreat had been canceled, but it was resuming this year. Even better, family members were allowed to join, and the destination was Hawaii. Wow, A family trip. I'm so excited. I felt genuinely happy about the idea of spending time together as a family of 3, Steve, Owen, and me, for the first time in ages. Owen also seemed thrilled at the prospect, especially since he rarely got to spend time with his dad. That evening, when Steve returned home from work, I greeted him at the door, only to find Emily standing next to him. It wasn't uncommon for Emily to either show up uninvited or accompany Steve back home like this. Normally, just seeing her would dampen my spirits, but today I was so elated that her presence didn't bother me much. I quickly told Steve about the company retreat announcement. Isn't it exciting? This will be the first time the 3 of us, me, you, and Owen, are going on a trip together. Owen's so excited about it too. In contrast to my cheerful announcement, Steve furrowed his brows and appeared deep in thought. Just as a sense of unease began creeping over me, his face suddenly lit up as if he'd had a revelation.
Since family is allowed, I'll take my only family, Emily. You and Owen can stay home.
I was so stunned by Steve's statement that I stood frozen, unable to respond. Never in my wildest dreams had I imagined he would suggest leaving Owen and me behind and taking Emily on the company retreat instead. Emily smirked, looking back and forth between Owen and me, and mockingly said, "Take care of the house while we're gone, okay?" Owen, devastated by Steve and Emily's words, burst into tears. I hugged Owen's trembling shoulders, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and sorrow. However, Steve and Emily seemed completely unaffected by Owen's tears and continued chatting excitedly.
It's been so long since I've been to Hawaii.
I need to shop for new outfits for the trip.
At that moment, something inside me shattered completely. Somewhere along the way, Steve had lost sight of what it meant to be a family. To him, Owen and I were no longer family. Emily was the only one who held that title. Realizing this at last, I thought to myself, how could I have been such a fool? There was no longer any point in staying with Steve. I muttered, "All right," then handed Owen his favorite apple juice and told him, "Wait in the next room for a little while." Once I made sure Owen had moved to the other room, I retrieved a piece of paper from a shelf in the corner of the living room and thrust it at Steve. "Will you sign these divorce papers?" I had prepared the papers since the time Emily started practically living in our home, just in case. I moved Owen to the other room because I didn't want him to witness what was about to unfold.
What? Divorce? Why?
Steve's face was filled with disbelief. "Because I can't live with you anymore. Please, let's get divorced." When I stated this firmly, Steve mumbled, "Well, who's going to do the chores now?" But he quickly broke into a cold, smug smile and began speaking as if the divorce didn't matter to him at all.
Wow, I didn't think you'd be the one to bring up divorce. Well, I'm about to get a promotion anyway. I'll just find a better wife than you, so it's no skin off my back. You were a pretty decent housekeeper, though I'll miss that part just a bit.
Those cold words left me with a mix of disappointment and a faint sense of relief. Steve had never truly seen me as more than a housekeeper.
I always thought Steve deserved someone better than this plain woman. I want a prettier sister-in-law next time.
Emily laughed loudly. I silently watched as Steve nodded at her words and signed the divorce papers. His mind was clearly preoccupied with the trip he was planning with Emily, and he was likely signing the papers impulsively without much thought. And just like that, our marriage came to an abrupt and unceremonious end. While Steve and Emily busied themselves preparing for their trip, I quietly made preparations for a new life with Owen. Although the divorce was finalized, the details regarding the division of assets and other arrangements were to be discussed with a lawyer once Steve returned from his trip. Finally, the day of the retreat arrived, and Steve and Emily departed, brimming with excitement. They seemed completely oblivious to my plans, and I felt a small sense of relief. When Steve and Emily returned from their cheerful adventure, I began formal discussions with Steve about our divorce. It seemed Steve had thoroughly enjoyed Hawaii. His skin was deeply tanned. His face was pale only where his sunglasses had been, which made him look somewhat comical. He tried to boast about the wonderful memories he'd made in Hawaii, clearly expecting me to listen, but I ignored him completely. For the record, there weren't any souvenirs for me or Owen. Not that I'd expected any in the first place. Steve always maintained an air of confidence when it came to the divorce.
You're going to end up living a poor life with Owen. Even if you regret divorcing me, there's no way I'll ever take you back.
That's the kind of sarcastic remark he made. But when the discussions began with the lawyer present, a shocking truth was revealed to Steve.
What? Wait a second. Chloe makes more money than I do. No way. That can't be true.
Steve's eyes widened in disbelief. I calmly responded to him. It's not a lie. I earn far more than you do, Steve. The truth was, my income far exceeded Steve's annual salary. I had studied design and programming in college and worked for a design company before marrying Steve. While I struggled in the beginning, I eventually won multiple competitions and earned high praise from my supervisors, who recognized my skills. I was even awarded several times within the company, leaving me with fond memories. Although I left my job after getting married, my former supervisor, recognizing my talent, began sending freelance design projects my way. Between managing housework and childcare, I steadily honed my skills and built a strong reputation within the industry. Eventually, work started pouring in, and now I earn significantly more than Steve's annual income.
You never told me anything about this. You always said you were just making a little money as a hobby.
Steve sputtered, his frustration evident as he tried to process the revelation. You're too proud, so if I had told you the truth, you would have gotten upset. That's why I kept my actual income a secret and made sure to save diligently for the family, just in case anything ever happened. Additionally, I secretly bought Owen the things he wanted because I didn't want him to feel deprived. Steve, despite buying anything Emily wanted, wouldn't even get Owen a single toy. I was the one who bought all of Owen's toys and clothes. Since Steve didn't pay any attention to the household, he never questioned why Owen had new toys or was wearing new clothes. He probably assumed my parents were the ones providing them. Living with Steve, who had changed so much after our marriage, was tough, but as a mother, I focused on supporting Owen and preparing a solid foundation for a brighter future.
I can't believe this. I thought you were practically a stay-at-home mom after quitting your job.
Steve looked utterly shocked, an expression I had never seen on his face before. He had naturally assumed that he would always hold the upper hand financially, so he couldn't hide his shock. The realization that I, whom he had always looked down on, was not only financially independent but also earning more than him deeply shook Steve's confidence. Naturally, I secured custody of Owen. For the record, Owen wasn't present during the discussions. I had explained the situation to my parents, and they were kind enough to look after him. As the discussions progressed, I was the one who came to learn a surprising truth. It turned out that Steve was in debt. Apparently, not only had he been giving money to Emily for her living expenses and luxuries, but he had also been piling up debt by treating his co-workers to drinks, all while boasting about his impending promotion. Debt? Steve, what were you thinking? Getting into debt just to keep up appearances, isn't that completely foolish? I hadn't suspected he was in debt, so I was both surprised and utterly exasperated.
Shut up. Sure, I have debt now, but once I get promoted, it won't be a problem. I'll pay it off in no time.
Steve shouted, his face turning bright red. As a result of the division of assets determined by the lawyer, Steve was left with almost nothing. Even in such dire circumstances, his pride prevented him from admitting defeat. However, it was clear that knowing I earned more than him deeply stung. I noticed a faint hint of tears in his eyes. The only thing propping up his fragile ego was his firm belief that he would be promoted in the next round of personnel changes. He spoke with complete confidence, saying, "My boss has put in a good word for me, so there's no doubt I'll be promoted," and seemed to be looking forward to landing a good position. But there was no guarantee that this promotion would actually come through. While I had lost all sympathy for Steve, things were different when it came to Owen. Wanting to avoid conflict for the sake of my child, I calmly said to Steve, "I won't ask for child support for Owen. You're already in debt, so there's no way you could handle a lump sum payment, and frankly, I don't want to deal with you for the next 16 years. You've never been a good father to Owen, so it's better to cut ties quickly for his sake." Steve seemed relieved to hear that, but at the same time, he shot me a resentful glare. The house would remain with Owen and me. Thus, the divorce negotiations ended in my favor, bringing my relationship with Steve to a close. But deep down, I felt it wasn't truly over yet. I had prepared for a new life with Owen, but I had no intention of passively watching Steve continue his irresponsible and selfish life with Emily. I was ready to see how Steve's promotion prospects would unfold and where his life would take him. At the same time, I quietly advanced my final plan as I took the first steps into my new life. On the day Steve moved out, Emily came to our house to help him. When they had finished packing and were about to leave through the front door, I called out to them. "Hey, both of you, wait a second. There's something I want you to see." Steve and Emily turned back with puzzled expressions, and I handed them a few photographs. The moment they saw the photos, their faces turned as pale as ghosts.
Why do you have these?
Steve asked, his voice trembling. The photograph showed Emily leaving a hotel with Steve's boss and someone from the ER department. Emily was also stunned, muttering, "How?" in disbelief. I should be the one asking questions. What exactly is going on here? Why is Emily seen entering and leaving a hotel with Steve's boss and manager from HR? I already knew the truth, but I pressed Steve to make him confess.
Well, it's nothing. I mean, it's a coincidence. Emily's single, so she's free to date whoever she wants, isn't she?
Steve, clearly flustered, tried to brush it off, but his darting eyes gave him away. A coincidence? Is that so? Every single one of them happens to be connected to your promotion. Really just a coincidence? At my pointed remark, Steve and Emily visibly flinched. The truth was, Steve had been exploiting Emily's youth and beauty to get close to his boss and the HR department in order to secure his promotion. He had even arranged for her to engage in intimate relationships with them. If they were married, you used that fact to blackmail them. If they were single, you made her build close relationships to strengthen your position, all just to secure your promotion, right? When I said this calmly, Steve's face turned even paler. I then began explaining how I had uncovered his scheme. It was, ironically, a pure accident. One day, I happened to overhear a conversation between Steve and Emily at home, and the content of their secret discussion revealed their plan. From that point on, I discreetly hired a private investigator to gather evidence. I also reached out to a friend who worked at Steve's company for help. That friend told me it was odd for someone to bring their sister to a company retreat instead of their wife and child. Yet, some people were unusually supportive of her participation, which made identifying them much easier.
What the hell is this?
Steve stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but he couldn't seem to find the words. I coldly watched his panic and continued speaking. You must have been desperate for that promotion, but to climb the ladder by using others. I never thought you were that kind of person. From what a friend of mine had guessed, Steve's performance at work had been poor, and he was falling behind his peers. Feeling pressured, he resorted to this scheme. Even if you cheat your way into a promotion, do you really think things will work out afterward? I sighed, and Emily lashed out at me.
Snooping around like that is the lowest. I only did what Steve asked me to do. I didn't do anything wrong.
Do you even realize what you've done? Getting involved with married people, manipulating single ones with fake promises of love. It's despicable. You're going to face the consequences for this. As I spoke calmly, Emily's expression shifted into one of growing fear. A heavy silence filled the room. Owen was staying at my parents' house again today, and I couldn't be more relieved that he wasn't here to witness this. After a long pause, Steve suddenly dropped to his knees as if the weight of the situation had crushed him. He looked up at me with pleading eyes. He bit his lip in distress before forcing the words out.
Please, Chloe, just don't tell the company. This job is all I have. If this gets out, it'll be over. Forget about the promotion. I might even lose my job.
Emily, who was standing nearby, hurried over to me in a panic.
Please, Chloe.
Tears welled up in her eyes.
I was forced into this. I only did it because Steve asked me to. Please. Please keep this a secret.
Both of them desperately pleaded with me. Their arrogance from before was now nowhere to be seen. But my expression remained unchanged. I stared at them coldly, sighed deeply, and then spoke quietly. It's too late. The evidence has already been submitted to Steve's company through my friend. Steve muttered, "No way," and slumped his shoulders in despair. Emily, her voice trembling, whispered, "That's Not possible. Soon, the two of them began blaming each other.
Why were those photos even taken? I told you to be more careful.
You're saying it's my fault? I only did this for you, and this is how you repay me? Don't be ridiculous.
For me, you just wanted the money. After everything I spent on you, you still managed to mess it up.
Their argument escalated, with both of them shouting at each other. It turned out that Emily had been receiving money from Steve in exchange for her cooperation. I watched their pitiful display with a detached expression and sighed heavily. Can you two take your pointless argument outside? You're disturbing the neighbors. At my sharp remark, they both froze and exchanged uneasy glances. After a moment, Emily averted her gaze, grabbed Steve's arm, and murmured,
Let's go, Steve.
Steve shot me one last resentful look, but, clearly drained of the will to argue, left the house with Emily in tow. Silence returned to the room, and for the first time in a long while, I could finally take a deep breath. I realized that peace had finally returned to my life. After that, Steve faced severe disciplinary action from his company, and his career came to an abrupt end. The revelation of Steve's unethical actions regarding his promotion severely damaged the company's trust in him, leading not only to his downfall, but also to disciplinary action against the boss and HR personnel who had supported his promotion. Steve was not recognized for his abilities, but was instead exposed for using his sister behind the scenes to secure a promotion. As a result, he was held accountable for betraying the company's trust and was unceremoniously fired.
Please, anything but being fired.
Steve reportedly pleaded for mercy, but, of course, his appeals were completely ignored. Emily, on the other hand, was faced with demands for compensation from the families of the employees she had relationships with. Many of them had families, and the betrayal enraged their wives and children, who directed their anger at Emily. Emily claimed that she hadn't engaged in the relationships of her own free will, but testimony from those involved revealed that she had actually conspired with Steve and willingly initiated the intimate relationships. As a result, a massive bill for damages landed in her hands. Thus, the two began blaming each other, their once close bond completely shattered, leaving their relationship bitter and hostile. With Steve and Emily's scheme falling apart and the two of them disappearing completely from my life, peace finally returned to me. The house, now free of Steve and Emily, felt as though a heavy chain had been lifted, with a bright and light atmosphere flowing through it. I threw myself wholeheartedly into my work as a freelance designer. Without having to cater to Steve or Emily, I could set my own schedule and communicate smoothly with my clients. Each morning, I would wake up early to send Owen off to preschool and then immerse myself in work during the day. After preschool, I spent more time with Owen, whether at the park or going on small shopping trips. With no need to worry about Steve, Owen and I could live freely, exactly how we wanted. Owen was growing up happy and carefree. Seeing his bright smile as he talked to me excitedly reminded me how fulfilling it was to be his mother.
Mommy, where are we going after preschool today?
Owen would ask eagerly every morning, his excitement fueling my energy. Well, how about we go to the park with the big swings today? The days of living in suffocating tension now felt like a distant memory, and I could finally live as I pleased, showering Owen with unconditional love. In our quiet and warm home, I couldn't help but feel that the future I would walk together with Owen was nothing but bright.